Hello, hello, hello. Welcome.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our HR Insights, our third Lunch and Learn this year. So this one is Navigating the ADA, what you really need to know, and we're happy that you're here. I'm Christy Hernandez. I am the Learning and Organizational Development Division Leader. I work in human resources, and I have a couple of my colleagues here with me. I'll have them introduce themselves here in just a minute. But as we get started, as usual, I'd kind of like to have you start to communicate with us a little bit in chat because we will be using chat as we go through. We've got a couple of polls for you today as well. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and open up your chat panel and let us know your name, what department you're in. And then the other thing I want to know, every time we're here for a lunch and learn, it's kind of fun to talk about food a little bit. So I want to know, what is your favorite lunch restaurant? If you weren't at your desk eating, joining us for this fantastic lunch and learn, what restaurant would you want to go to? What would be your favorite place to have lunch at if you weren't at your desk? So mine is Pepe's Bistro. I don't go out to lunch very often, but that's one that I love. It's kind of fun to just walk down the block a little ways and ooh, buy sandwiches. That one's good too. I was there the other day. So yeah, let us know your favorite lunch restaurant. And while you're doing that, we'll move on to the next slide.
Got it.
There we go. Okay, so what we want to let you know about is if you need captions, there's a way that you can turn those on. So if you click the More button, so at the top of your screen, there should be 3 dots that says More underneath, and you can then hover over the language and speech section and click on Show Live Captions, and that will turn captions on for you if you want to read and kind of follow along as we go through today's session. So keep those comments coming. I'm seeing some places that I'm probably going to have to go try out. Beth, I see that you went to Da Vinci's. I honestly have not been to the one in this neighborhood, and I think that would be a great place. Laura de Leon's, absolutely. Some good restaurants we're going to have to check out. Okay, Beth, will you move us forward on the slides?
I will.
Thank you. So today we are here to talk about the American Disability Act, the ADA. And I have our in-house experts here with me from the risk department in human resources. There are leave experts and experts in many other things, but they are going to walk us through this today. So Sarah and Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you if you will introduce yourselves and get the ball rolling.
Hey, well, I'm Beth Olson. I am the Employee Leave Benefits Manager. Some of you may have had conversations or emails or interactions with me.
And I'm Sarah Kroll. I'm the Risk Management Division Leader, and I'm loving your lunch choices. Gosh, I don't know. If I had to pick one, I think I'd pick El Potrero. I like that Laura wants to eat De Leon's every day. But buy sandwiches is also an excellent choice. Really good. CCQ. Love it.
All right, so our goal today is to share information to help employees become happier and better workers. Before we get started, we'd like to hear from you. Christy is going to start a poll. Let us know, how familiar are you with the ADA?
Okay, so everyone should see a poll in front of them. Go ahead and select what is your level of expertise or your level of familiarity with the ADA. Select your response, click submit, and let us just get a look at what's your level of knowledge. Oh, we've got some varying levels. It looks like most people are kind of in the middle, but we've got an ace or two in the crowd.
That might have been me.
Okay.
I thought I'd play along.
Yes, for sure. All right, thank you.
Are they slowing down? Are we ready to? learn
Yep.
this by the end of this, everybody's going to be an ace, right? That's the idea. All right. Well, welcome everybody. So the first thing we're going to start with is ADA basics everyone should know. We're here to share information on the Americans with Disabilities Act, aka otherwise known as the ADA, and where and when it may apply. There are many situations occurring daily where an individual or supervisor may not even realize that a situation could apply under the ADA as a reasonable accommodation. If you've ever had a medical situation and thought, my job would be just a little bit easier, or I could really do XYZ a bit better if I were just able to fill in the blank, your request might have been able to be pursued under the ADA. Often, I've heard of departments approving an accommodation for an employee. However, there might have been a few steps in the process missed, just unknowingly, to meet the standards under the ADA. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why that's a concern for our team and how we are here to help make sure we dot all those I's and cross all those T's. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law on July 26, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. It was a landmark piece of legislation providing the first comprehensive civil rights protections for people with disabilities and prohibiting discrimination in various areas of public life. That includes employment, public accommodations, transportation, and telecommunications. The ADA aimed to ensure that individuals with disabilities have equal opportunities and are able to participate fully in society. Then in 2008, there was an amendment. So the ADA Amendments Act, otherwise known as the ADAAA, went into law, and it just expanded the scope of the ADA, provides a little bit broader protections against discrimination. Now, while all of the areas under ADA are important that I just mentioned above, this presentation is going to specifically focus on Title I under the ADA, which addresses employment-related accommodations. As we are government entities, there are other departments within the city and county which may also be familiar with the other aspects of the ADA, such as Parks and Rec, Building and Safety, LTU with the streets and sidewalks and transportation, engineering for the county, and any other department having interactions with the public, making sure those we serve, the public, have equal access, both physical and in communication, to the areas that we cover for the public. Technology has advanced and made things much easier in many ways, though there continue to be advancements and situations where we can still do much better. Sarah?
Yeah, as Beth mentioned, so under the ADA, there are many different subsections that are usually referred to as titles that cover different aspects of the accommodations and disabilities. And today we are going to focus on Title I, which refers to employees under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in order to qualify for the ADA, employers have to have at least 15 employees, and employees with disabilities should be able to perform the essential functions of their position with or without reasonable accommodation. A lot of times we get questions about what employees means, what that covers. It actually covers the majority, pretty much all of our employees, temporary, on-call, seasonal, full-time, part-time. So we work with all different types of employees to make sure that they have what they need for their jobs and be able to perform at the levels that we want them to, that they want to, so that we can all work together. What qualifies as a disability? Now, some folks may not know that there are disabilities which are permanent and there are disabilities which are temporary. A physical or mental impairment could also be a disability. Those disabilities can be visible, they can be invisible. They could include a wheelchair or potentially a you're in a walking boot because you were injured on the job for a workers' compensation case. That's a temporary disability. It could also include such things as a hearing aid. So mental health is also one of those disabilities that's covered. So we're going to go through those a little bit. And if at any time you have questions or think of something as Beth and I are talking, feel free to put those in the chat and we will definitely address those.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump into reasonable accommodations at work. Many everyday conveniences that we now take for granted were shaped or required originally by the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. Think about your daily life, places you like to go shop or for fun or work. There are a lot of things available to us now, which were originally implemented for individuals with disabilities. And like I said, sometimes we take those things for granted. Think about it for just a minute. What are some examples you can think of that you probably make use of almost every day that are available to us as a result of the ADA? Let us know in the chat. You guys have some examples, things to share that you can think of? Anybody? Okay, so one I can think of, how many of you have used the push buttons on the doors?
Oh, we've got some
Now I
elevators.
see some coming in.
Yep,
The
elevator coming
ramps
in. Mm-hmm.
instead of stairs. While some of us don't need those ramps, a lot of us might use those. You guys can't see it, but I have an ergonomic mouse. I'm trying to get it in there. I have an ergonomic mouse. And I don't necessarily have a disability, but I sure do like using my mouse.
Lower counters too, that's something that came in.
Noise
Chairs at a
canceling
clerk window.
headphones. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are lots of things that have made our lives much easier, that I can't honestly sometimes imagine life without some of them. All right. So thanks to the ADA, many features that began as accessibility tools are now things that we all are able to use and take advantage of and benefit from. Proof that designing for inclusion often ends up helping everyone. We have another poll.
Okay. So yeah, I'm going to get this poll started. And the question here is, which of these everyday work tasks might be affected by a disability? And your list that's showing up in the poll window, you can scroll down, read through that, and select anything that you think might be affected by a disability. I think this is something that, on a daily basis, maybe many of us aren't even thinking about these types of things. We don't realize that a number of the things that we maybe take for granted can be impacted by different disabilities. And so go ahead and read through the list, pop your ideas in chat, and we'll just kind of see. It looks like there's a fairly even selection here, that most people are kind of selecting all or most of the items listed here. So Beth and Sarah, do you want to talk us through any of these and just kind of point out what are some things we may not think about on these?
Well, reading and responding to emails, there could be vision impairments, learning disabilities, cognitive processing challenges. I'm trying to look at some of these highly answered, some of the ones that had top answers. A noisy environment. Absolutely. Hearing sensitivities, autism, staying focused, migraines.
There were a couple that didn't get very many votes. The participating in team brainstorming sessions and reviewing spreadsheets or technical documents. And those actually can be impacted by disabilities as well. We may not think about it often, but yeah, in some cases, there are social anxieties or certain disorders where those types of things could be really challenging.
We've had a case with someone with a hearing impairment who didn't participate a whole lot in team meetings and sessions because they couldn't always hear everyone, especially when they talked over top of each other. Their hearing aid wasn't able to filter enough to be able to hear. So it's really important that people talk one at a time, or the captioning can really help.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Dyslexia may serve as a disability for someone who's reviewing those technical documents or Excel sheets. So a lot of times we can look into assistive technologies, or employees or folks will know how to work best within the parameters of their specific needs and disabilities. So sometimes they even have tools that we may not even be aware of or suggest, which is really cool. So we're able to work with other people and learn about a lot of different tools to help.
There's so much more available to people now than there used to be. And I think why this is important is because we're all working, well, a lot of times anyway, we're working on teams, we're working with a variety of different people. And so if we can be a little bit aware of the types of things that can possibly be challenging for people, it helps us be able to try and make choices and do things that can be a little bit more inclusive for others, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later. So thanks for this poll.
Yeah, this exercise just reminds us how varied disabilities can be and that many aren't visible. Disabilities affect mobility, vision, hearing, mental health, cognition, chronic pain. As we have all generations, they talk about in the workforce, we have all sorts of different barriers or issues that we're dealing with in the job, and anything we can do to help someone do better at their job. That's always been one of my goals anyway. So, types of accommodations. Sarah mentioned accommodations must assist the employee in performing the essential functions. We are not required to eliminate or replace those job functions, but they do have to be able to meet those basics. We also cannot require the employer to hire additional staff. So a reasonable accommodation might include remote work or a schedule adjustment if you're talking under a temporary accommodation. Technology is generally going to be a permanent accommodation. Additional leave is usually a temporary accommodation. Things like elevators, escalators, handrails, ramps, you get the idea. Those are permanent fixtures generally. Captioning devices, someone may be using one today, but they don't necessarily use them all the time or need them all the time. That could be permanent or temporary. We're lucky. That's one of the ones I think about. We're lucky in today's world that a lot of technology comes with captioning and some of those services, so that we don't have to have a separate device anymore that does that, or spend a lot of time retyping and preparing. A lot of technology has that built in. Temporary accommodation under our policies are generally allowable for a maximum of 6 months, at which point the person would need to be able to return to their full position. And what you can think of is if someone had surgery and is unable to use one of their legs or feet, and so they have crutches or a wheelchair or a scooter for a period of time. There are some other things that may qualify, but those types of situations are going to be allowable for up to 6 months maximum. Any others or anything in our slide? All right, I will move on. Accommodations in action. Accommodations may depend on job duties and availability. What's feasible for one role may not be for another. I've had situations in the past where we had a special project right now, but that didn't mean that we would always have that going on. Reasonableness is key. Not every request is approved, but all must be considered in good faith. If a similarly situated employee is allowed to remote work, for example, or to flex their schedule, that's generally going to be considered a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. We've worked with some departments and discussed that a blanket, we don't allow any accommodations, is not compliant with the ADA. Each request must be evaluated, and we have an obligation to at least discuss the situation and all the options that might be available. Although departments do manage their own operations, this is a big consideration sometimes with money. Funding for accommodations would be taken under consideration with the city as a whole or the county budget as a whole, and not necessarily by specific department budgets. That has sometimes surprised supervisors when we've had conversations. So we just thought we would include that. Have a little discussion there. When we talk about reasonable, that doesn't mean anything goes. I think I touched on this just a minute ago, but not every request will result in an approved accommodation or the accommodation that is the top choice for the employee. Doesn't always mean it's the top choice for the employer either. It kind of works both ways. Accommodations are intended to support performance and the person doing the job. It doesn't excuse a non-performer. And if you think about someone in a wheelchair who's very functional to be able to use their logic and reasoning and typing and those types of things, as long as they can get in the building. So an accommodation to let them get into work is very reasonable. Chronic tardiness or a failure to communicate absences is not reasonable. I just sent out an email to a couple of employees last week about not communicating absences. So calling in tardy or calling in late or just not showing up to work are not really an accommodation that would be approved under ADA, and that's not really protected by FMLA either. So we can discuss medical things, but communication is still important until the department knows that it is FMLA or ADA. It would be considered just performance and a tardy or an absent or that kind of thing. Let's see, all employees, accommodated or not, are expected to follow those attendance and communication policies. So I think we've covered that. Hiring or forcing other staff to complete essential functions is not required under the ADA. So because someone doesn't want to go meet with the public doesn't mean they can do everything else with their job and someone else would be hired to meet with the public if that is an essential function and part of their job. Position classifications and employee position descriptions generally outline those essential functions for determining what a person has to be able to do to be successful in their job. Consistency does matter. Having this in mind, being consistent with accommodations is where risk can really help. When we are consistent across the city or across the county, across the department, across different classes and positions, we are looking at what have we been able to do before. That's probably very reasonable. Past accommodations do influence future decisions. Avoiding ad hoc or undocumented accommodations prevents compliance risks and inconsistency. And then our team is here to really help ensure that precedent-setting decisions are really evaluated in line with the law, our past precedent, what are other departments doing, what has the department done before. We're really looking at that consistency and helping with that. So are we doing good so far? Okay. Nothing? You guys are a quiet bunch today. All right, so we'll move on to the ADA process. I think these are some of the big questions that people usually have. You know, how do I apply? How do I go about it? How does this work? So here we go. Generally, some type of notice is required to initiate the ADA process. It's best if requests originate from the employee, although it could be someone on their behalf. So there could be discussion with a supervisor. The conversation I had at the beginning where if I just had ABC, I could do my job better. Or, you know, this having this would just make my life just a little bit easier and allow me to do just a little bit more or to not struggle quite so much. Sometimes that could be the discussion. It could be a lot of times what I find is there's a medical note provided after a procedure or a doctor's visit. That could be considered a request. An employee might notice someone else struggling and it appears due to a medical or disabling condition. Once a supervisor or a leader or a level of management is aware of a potential ADA request, risk should be notified as soon as practical. I do want to say that if an employee notices another employee, they are welcome to notify risk as soon as possible as well. A side note on that, as leaders and supervisors, some of you are HR reps, it's crucial to be trained to know what you are listening for. So employees don't have to say ADA or Americans with Disabilities or I want an accommodation. It could be that simple conversation of, due to my migraines, it would really be helpful if I were able to flex my time. Could be enough to alert a supervisor that, hey, maybe I should touch base with risk and we should see if this qualifies under the ADA. Employees are encouraged to submit requests proactively. Accommodations are considered moving forward. We are not able to go back and retroactively apply accommodations to past events or situations. We can't change what has already happened, if that makes sense. But we can make adjustments and we can do better going forward, especially once we know. You can only do better with what you know and do what you know and move forward, right? In my experience, it has worked out best if a department or a concerned individual discusses the potential for an accommodation with the employee prior to risk reaching out. Sometimes people get a little thrown off if I am calling them out of the blue to talk about a disability. It can really make people uncomfortable. So a little bit of preparation can go a long way with someone they know, sometimes helps out. Our goal with risk is to provide guidance through the process, and we are happy to help anyone find the necessary forms. As you can see that we have the online origami case management link, or you can email risk@lincoln.ne.gov and we will work through getting all the things taken care of. So, our job, risk management. As we work through the process, the employee will receive an email from risk from our claims management system with information such as an outline of what to expect in the process. We'll send out a medical certification under the ADA, the employee position description, and an ADA medical release form. So the outline of the process is informational. That's just for the employee to understand how this works, why this works, what we're doing, what's going to come. By reviewing the ADA medical certification and the employee description with the treating physician, the idea is that the employee and the doctor will be able to really provide us with some specific restrictions or accommodations that may help the employee meet the expectations of their position. We've had some very vague ones sometimes that we've had to go back and say, but what exactly do you need, or how do you have suggestions for things we can actually do differently or change, or is there something that we need to do in order to help meet your goals? The more specific is usually better. Do you have any good examples, Sarah?
I was just going to add that, and I know you're getting to this point on the slide, but the medical release, many times we get questions about that. And I think it's important to clarify that the release is there. This process is very similar to the FMLA process and to the FMLA medical documentation and paperwork and certifications that we collect for that process as well. And many times we can utilize from across those because they overlap in some sort of way. 9 times out of 10. So the medical release, when we are asking folks to complete that, we are only getting information as it pertains to the medical event that we're talking about, that we're looking for accommodations for. And as Beth had already mentioned, there will be times where we just need to ask the treating physician or the doctor's office for clarification, or we may ask, hey, we had a discussion with the employee and they suggested that they would be able to actually do 3 or 4 pieces of the job while they're working remotely. Maybe they had surgery and it's a temporary accommodation. But maybe on the original form, the doctor had marked, no, they can't do anything. They need to stay home. And the employee is saying, but I can do this. I want to, I can do it. So we will work with the doctor's office then to clarify that and say, hey, the employee is asking or saying that, advocating for themselves, that they would really like to be able to do this project while they're at home. Is that something that you would be in support of? And in those situations, that's where that medical release comes into play.
I was thinking of the situation we had where the note talked about what is the employee unable to work, and they put up to 6 hours, and the employee said, so it said they were, so the note, the way it read, said they were unable to work up to 6 hours, and the employee said, no, I need 2 hours off. And it said, we just need to clarify with the doctor, does this mean that you are working 6 hours or that you're working 2 hours? Because that makes a difference in how we are enforcing the medical note and what we're able to allow. So,
and we
well,
do not share those with supervisors or any of that information. That all stays confidential as well, just like the FMLA.
Yep. I was going to say sometimes we get those from the employee, or the employee copies both us and the supervisor, and the supervisor is not going to get that information from us. So that's where our obligation is and how we handle that. Again, we're not looking for anyone's entire medical history. We just want enough to help clarify what can we help to meet this employee's needs in this situation. Once these forms are returned, we will reach out to schedule an interactive conversation. The interactive conversation is required under the ADA. I've had this discussion with several supervisors when they want to know what's the process, or what are we required, or what do we have to do. So the idea is to engage in dialogue with employees. Let's make sure we understand all of what they're asking. I've gone into several meetings where there were lots of questions beforehand, and it was, let's just ask the employee. let's just go talk to them. It's a great time for questions and clarifications. You know, did the note mean this? Did the doctor mean this? We had a note once where it said the person is taking these medications. Well, those are narcotics, and can they still do the job? And it's like, well, let's ask the employee. Because I know my spouse has been in a situation where they were able to take the meds when I picked them up because I drove home. So they weren't taking them while they were working, but they did need to still continue doing those. And we were able to make that accommodation work. Risk management will generally set up a meeting with the employee and or the supervisor. The employee may request to invite an individual for assistance in clarifying their needs, or they may ask to meet with risk confidentially for the initial discussion. I've had all 3 of those happen in my time with the city and county. We are working with the employee and having discussions to explore accommodation options, not necessarily to make final decisions. How many ideas and alternatives can we come up with? We're just brainstorming. Are there better ones than the original request? Sometimes a supervisor will have a good option and say, oh, hey, we were able to do this for this person. Would that work in this case? Sometimes we have to reach out to IS or property management in budget and the specifics in making sure that the work can be done, especially when you're talking changing the building or having to do some construction things. Does the technology work with our phone system? Does it work with all of the technology that we have? The employees in the department have already made arrangements. Sometimes I'll get a note from a supervisor that said, hey, so-and-so starting on Monday with this note. And so most of the time there's been a really good job done and you can tell that they've had the conversation. We'll simply request documentation, such as an email that, hey, we talked to this person and we're able to meet the 5-pound restriction for this long. These are usually not a concern or the red flags for us. Sometimes we've found where a decision's been made or is close to being made where the accommodation was going to be denied or was unable to be met. And so just checking in that discussion with the interactive conversation, discussion was held with the employee, that's required under the ADA. Were others in the department allowed similar privileges with, especially big since I've been here, is remote work or flexible scheduling? What is already allowed in the department? Let's talk about what might be reasonable. Sometimes reasoning was that it might upset other employees, which does not meet the undue hardship requirement under the ADA. So the undue hardship, you can refuse accommodations if it is an undue hardship. That's a pretty high standard for most departments, especially if you're thinking about taking the entire county budget or the entire city budget into consideration. Situations can be very unique, though, to the disability, the position. There is no one size fits all, which is where risk can really help out. Again, where we talked about with the consistency. Risk requests notes for documentation from the department if the interactive process has already occurred. We just want to make sure all of those I's are dotted and those T's are crossed and that we're getting everything that we're making sure that we've met all of our responsibilities to the employee to help meet their accommodation. So during the interactive conversation, we're going to confirm that there is a medical disability, temporary or permanent, which is one of the reasons we need that medical documentation. We're going to have a discussion of the position and the essential functions. Which things is the employee struggling to complete? Are there things that are going well? We're going to discuss suggestions or recommendations on those accommodations. This is really kind of fun because you get into some fun brainstorming. And then are there concerns? What are the concerns? What are the thoughts on logistics? And then we talk about timelines to implement and follow up. One of the things risk brings is making sure that we are checking in, that we are following up. How are things going? Sometimes it's great, and sometimes we need to make a few little tweaks and get some clarification. Once we get through the request and all the forms and we've done the interactive process, risk will evaluate the accommodation. We will meet with department leaders first and kind of talk through, here's how much the budget will be on this, or here's what it looks like in practice. Talk through, give them a chance to kind of have some conversation about the accommodation. And then we will review all of that information and we will put together a final decision in writing. We will send that out to the employee and relevant parties, such as the supervisor. And that will have the follow-up dates. We'll get that in our system. So we are going to move into another chat question. What accommodations have you encountered? We'd like to hear from you, what you've seen, what if you've been part of the process, things you've heard of, things you've been involved with that you've implemented. Do you guys have some thoughts to share with us? I've got some good, we got people typing. Trying to think if there's a good story that I've had in the last, sometimes they can get very interesting. Sometimes accommodations are completed in that meeting. Sometimes they can take a couple of weeks. SOPs or training specific to an individual. Okay.
Yeah, just within some of the areas that we've worked with, someone already mentioned the noise canceling headphones. Those have been a really great device for some of our folks who are a little bit more disrupted by noisier environments. So as long as the job that they're doing doesn't require them to be in a safety sensitive position where maybe they need to be aware of their surroundings, those noise canceling headphones have been a great addition to the toolbox.
Who talk to type programs. I was just thinking about the comment with the chair and the standing desk. When it comes to things like, I don't know that I put this anywhere else in the presentation, but when it comes to things like a footrest or a mouse or a keyboard, our general recommendation is to purchase those. Take care of your staff, and those are pretty low budget items that make life better. If any of you are not using an ergonomic keyboard, I would say try one for 2 weeks and you would never go back. I love mine. I have a really hard time typing on a straight keyboard anymore. And I showed my ergonomic mouse earlier. Those have really, I think those have made my job much better here and at my last employer. Does anybody else use a standing desk? I can say I love mine. And I was telling these two, I figured out earlier, if they get locked, I figured out how to unlock them. So message me if you run into that situation. All right. It didn't move on. I have to click again. Okay, responsibilities. So what is my role? What am I supposed to do during the ADA process? Employees, really the biggest thing is notifying supervisor risk of a potential accommodation need, someone who can do something about it. Provide documentation upon request. That's one of the biggest things that we sometimes wait for and take the longest part of this. Make sure you're participating in that interactive process and in the discussions. Often we will ask the employee what their top choice is. We might ask them for their top 3 choices. If we're looking at purchasing some kind of item, honor the process and the final decision. We really try to get to a win-win situation. Sometimes we have to make compromises on both sides. So really honoring the process and the final decision. Make sure that leave accommodation absences are entered accurately in the timekeeping system. And noting in the notes ADA is very helpful. And then updating the supervisor risk. Let us know if you're still running into challenges or if there's concerns. When we address those early in the process, that really helps prevent bigger problems down the road.
Another responsibility of the employee, or a benefit to the employee, is that this is really employee driven. And the employee definitely has final say on whether or not they would like to move forward or accept the accommodation that has been proposed. So keep in mind that even though we may not arrive at the employee's top choice, or we come up with a compromise and we offer that as saying, hey, this is where we are able to go with this accommodation, the employee then has the opportunity to say, yes, I want to proceed with that, or no, I don't want to. So this is very much employee centered.
Absolutely. And then the supervisor department responsibilities, I talked a little bit about early on when you know. So the first thing is to notify risk. When you know that there's a potential accommodation, the sooner you get risk involved, the sooner we can work through and make sure all of those areas are covered. Supervisors and departments are responsible to participate and review reasonable accommodations as well. There've been a few departments that I've had to have some discussions with, and we had to discuss reasonableness. And there have been some that were just great at doing things. Make sure, again, honoring the process and the final decision. We're really working for that win-win for both parties. Making sure that when they're approving time, they're verifying that those absences are entered And then again, updating risk if they notice changes or concerns or clarifications. Sometimes there was this piece that when you get back to work in real life, we didn't think about. So sometimes we may need to just add some clarifying questions or review. And then risk management, our role is really the documentation. Clear documentation, you all know, supports consistency, transparency, protects both the employee and the employer. Accommodations should be well documented, align with the employee's functional limitations. As an employer, I'm impressed with how many accommodations. We really do provide a lot of accommodations for our employees and really work with our employees. I've seen some great things in my time here. Also, the mayor, city council, and county board really like to see that impact. So when we can provide some of those statistics and show what a great job you all are doing, that can be very beneficial. We want to avoid that discrimination. Does generalized anxiety disorder fall under the ADA? And I'm going to give that legal answer of it absolutely could. So we have several employees pursuing. If you would like to have an accommodation pursued, we showed the link. It's on that origami link, or you can email risk and I'll help work you through the process. Noise canceling headphones. Okay. I think that was for one of the other answers. Okay, cool. Some other considerations, I always like to throw in a slide that kind of talks about what didn't really fit anywhere else, but this is a good place to kind of talk about some other things. Everyday inclusion. We've talked about how accommodations or things intended to help people with disabilities make their life easier have really helped all of us. Make sure that we are communicating respectfully, avoiding assumptions or retaliation. Sometimes we've had those conversations where that's not fair that so-and-so gets two. Sometimes those things might be what are helping someone really do a great part of the job. And at the end of the day, we're all a team. And if everyone is being part of that team, it helps all of us do better. Consider how you could make your environment and activities more accessible in meetings, digital content, events. We actually just found the captioning when we were preparing for this meeting. And so we're like, let's make sure that we get that included. And then support coworkers who may have a disability that is disclosed or undisclosed. So in our chat, we have another question. What's one small thing that you do or could do to make your work more accessible? Any thoughts on? I can talk a little bit about my prior employment. I worked for Goodwill Industries, and I know I would have to, we had a couple of employees with wheelchairs, for example, so making sure they could get into the room that we were meeting in, making sure that there was room at the table for them to roll up to and not in the back, but really being able to be part of the conversation. If I notice that someone is struggling to hear or see things, helping share documents with them. Any other thoughts, comments? Oh, good one, Christy. Vent-free environment. Okay. Well, if you guys think of anything, go ahead and pop it in there. I talked about discussions with supervisors. This is generally something that I share with managers and department leaders. My rule of thumb I talk about is if the accommodation would be able to be provided for the highest and lowest performer in the same situation, it's probably a fair and reasonable and a good accommodation. You can jump in if you need to, Sarah, but sometimes we talk about ruinous empathy, where a tendency can be to provide accommodations for this person who we really like. And, there's things that, this we want to do here. And then there might be on the flip side when someone's newer, or maybe they're just not as good of a friend. And so being a little bit quicker to not want to provide some things on those. So we walk through those in the interactive conversation and with people at all levels, from the employee to departments, making sure. But if it's able to be provided for any employee in a similar situation, it's probably a very good accommodation. And that's
And generally, as Beth said, we recognize and we appreciate that most of the people that we work with have huge hearts, generous hearts, and they just want to do whatever it is they can do to help people. And they're sometimes willing to maybe do a little bit too much. So that's why we're asking you to make sure that we're involved in that process, just as Beth said, to make sure that it's fair and equitable. Sometimes we don't think about the long-term effects or some of the ripple effects that those what you say yes to helping one person may impact a whole group, a whole department,
the position
everyone.
description, the class
Yeah.
and comp. If we're removing essential functions, that can get into some legal consequences. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding any problems with the accommodations that we're providing. Okay, so common questions and myths. We've kind of talked about this a little, not ADHD necessarily, but ADHD could be considered a disability and require an accommodation. So when the question is ADHD covered, the question really is, what are the accommodation requests? Because people with ADHD have varying levels of needs that they may have. So ADHD could be the qualifying disability. The accommodation requests would really depend on, or the ability to accommodate would really depend on the specific request.
And it's similar to what Autumn had already asked about the generalized anxiety order and and Beth's response of maybe it could. It really is unique to the position and the job and what is going on there, the barriers that someone may be facing to completing the essential functions of their job, and how that disability impacts that and how we might be able to help.
Absolutely. We've already discussed what if I don't see a disability. There are a lot of disabilities as we are becoming more aware. It's a very different world today than it was even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so really trying to not have those assumptions that someone is not disabled because we can't see it. One of the biggest questions I get is, I don't have a disability, or I talked earlier in the presentation about it being helpful for someone to reach out to the employee with the accommodation request before risk just sends them an email. Because we've talked through, and if you've had a surgery where you are able to maybe not able to drive temporarily and part of your job is driving, that could be an accommodation that we've had to work through. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a disability. There could just be a temporary disabling condition that would qualify for an accommodation under the ADA. I don't want anyone in my department to know I have an ADA accommodation. We will not tell them, besides your supervisor or department leaders who will need to know. We will not share that information with anybody. My general response to people or supervisors when people are asking is, we work to meet everyone's needs equitably. If you have a concern that you would like to have addressed, you are welcome to complete a request and we can talk through what your situation might be. And that goes again with the, why does Joe get to do this and I don't, or not have to do this and I do? So those kind of go together. So for the last point on here, is pregnancy a disability? Again, we're going to go back to that very famous maybe. Pregnancy can have some implications under the ADA. However, there has been a couple of recent laws passed or acts passed. So there's a Pregnant Fair Worker Act that while you will see the origami claim, we go to the origami ADA claim process to run. We run it through that process because they're very similar. It is actually a separate law, the Pregnant Fair Workers Act, and pregnancy is generally going to apply under there. There could be some things that would fall under the scope of the ADA. So it's best to reach out to us if you have a question or a concern or thoughts on how to handle that. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Christy.
Thank you. We are ready for our lunchbox challenge, but I'm also noticing the time. I see that we're very close to the end of our session, so maybe we'll just do a couple of these so that there's time for us to get our closing in as well. So we have a couple of questions based on the information that we learned today, and I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll, and we want to hear what you think on this. So here's a scenario for us to all consider. An employee asks to wear noise-canceling headphones most of the day to help manage anxiety and focus. Do you think that this could be a reasonable accommodation under the ADA? Mark your answer, submit it, and then we'll hear from our experts what they say about this. So it looks like
we don't have any no's yet.
yeah, most people are going with it depends, but there's also a yes. What do you think, Sarah and Beth? What's the right answer for this one?
Well,
We're going to go with the world famous answer of it depends.
Hey, that was my answer too. Shocking.
Yeah, it truly depends on the essential functions of your job. What might be feasible or a proper tool to use for one position may not be for the other. For example, if your main job consists of being available to the public and being public facing, it may not be feasible for you to have a remote work schedule. So we have to look at every different we have to look at every request differently, and they're all unique. They all have their unique features. So it really does depend.
Okay, thank you. We're going to do one more poll, and this one, so the scenario is a staff member with a chronic health condition requests to shift their work schedule by an hour due to morning fatigue from medication. How should this request be handled? Do we approve it immediately? Do we deny it if it causes any disruption? Or do we begin the interactive conversation to learn more? What do you think? Oh, 100%. We've got people going after that interactive conversation. They got it right, didn't they?
They did.
You nailed it. Good job,
All
everybody.
right. Okay, I know we have a couple of chat questions, but I think we should move forward past those because it's 12:59. And so let's just get our closing items in.
I think we're going to skip right past these, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's go right to, and questions, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat or email me, email Risk. We will get to your questions one way or the other. So in closing, make sure you contact Risk with any employment ADA questions, requests, comments, thoughts, concerns. Public requests, because we talked about people maybe driving on the streets or accessing sidewalks, accessing buildings, coming in to visit with different departments. Any public requests would go to the ombudsman with the mayor's office. So we just wanted to put that little caveat in there for you all. And Christy?
Okay, so as always, we want to know your feedback. You can either use your phone and do the QR code. I've also just put a link to the feedback survey in chat. So if you would click that link or use the QR code and just take a couple of minutes, let us know your feedback. There's also an opportunity if you have some other ideas of topics that you would like us to cover in our HR Insights Lunch and Learns. We'd like to hear your suggestions. So Please take a minute and do that. And then Beth, if you would move on to the last slide, I just want to give a little bit of a plug here for our upcoming sessions. I think we will have an HR Insights in August, but we're still trying to nail that one down. So watch for that. We do have these on our training calendar. So if you kind of keep your eye on that, you'll see when we have some updates. But we know that we have one coming up in October with the same team, Work Comp 101, what happens after the injury. And we also have a couple of the Elevate Your Impact lunch and learns as well. So one in September with RJ Vega, Bridging Differences, and then another one in December, also with RJ, Communicating Effectively. So if you aren't registered for those yet, you can go to the HR intranet page for either city or county. Go to the learning page and click the big yellow button that says training calendar. And you can just kind of scroll through those. If we have registration links available, which we do for these 3, then you can get registered for those, and we hope to see you there. All right,
Thanks,
so that's,
guys.
yeah, that's it for us. Thank you, Sarah and Beth. Great information. As always, we really appreciate you, and thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.